Hi, I'm Denise.
And I'm Tom.
And welcome to our podcast, Because We've Been in Your Shoes.
We created our podcast for you, our nonprofit colleagues. As nonprofit professionals with over 50 years of experience combined, we've led nonprofit hospitals, university programs, campaigns that have transformed cities, communities, and campuses. We're from Chicago and Detroit, and now we're in the Pacific Northwest. Our work has taken us across the country from the Midwest to Seattle, to Portland, California, and nationally. We've seen it, lived it, and have learned from it.
We've all been through a lot as nonprofit professionals, and we hear you, we see you, and we understand. We know you, too, are used to wearing many hats. It can be exhausting, but we come together with the shared mission to transform the world. Because We've Been in Your Shoes is a podcast for you, us, and our entire nonprofit community, sharing and learning from one another so we can continue to innovate and unleash capacity for good. We'll hear from colleagues and peers, discuss emerging issues in the sector, and provide you with key takeaways and useful tips to support you in all you do. We believe that people and philanthropy equal possibilities. Join us on the Because We've Been in Your Shoes podcast with new topics and special guests. And here's where we left off.
So along these lines, all right, I'm going to ask you something. This is something
that challenging questions.
I know, I tell you.
This is something ghosting. Let's talk about
ghosting. I thought that was a dating term until this last year. I didn't even realize it would end up in recruiting.
You know, Agnes, you said what you just said is exactly. I started reading about ghosting, and I thought to myself, "What is ghosting?"
Right.
That was probably about 6 months ago, maybe even 9 months ago. I had to look it up. What is ghosting? I didn't even know what ghosting was, and I was just floored by what I was seeing. And I spoke to a number of my friends that are in the recruitment HR area. I'm like, "Tell me about this."
Uh-huh.
And they gave me various, explanation as to what's going on. And some of it was fair. Yeah. People are exhausted, and ghostings happen on both sides,
correct.
But it seemed to be more on the recruiter side, on the company side, more than anything else. But tell me about, from your experience, ghosting, good and bad, the ugly, recommendation.
Ghosting is horrible.
Boo,
don't do it.
It's scary.
So I have an interesting perspective on ghosting, because I have a son who graduated from college and has been applying for jobs in the for-profit sector. Interesting stories there. I think Dinez knows one of these stories, but interesting stories there. He probably puts out 5 to 7 applications every 2 days and may or may not ever hear from any company ever. And you're just like, wow, that is really bad HR practice. The least you could have is an auto return email that says, thank you for your application. You get absolutely nothing.
Wow.
He also had the experience, which I have never seen, I'd never even heard of before, where he applied to a position and it wasn't a real position. And they texted him and they wanted to do an interview online, except it was all by text. So it was like Teams, except you didn't have a real person's face. You just had a picture. And it was a fake job. And they offered him the job. Here it is, young college student. I just got this job. This is all so exciting. And I looked at the offer letter because it came remotely. And I was like, this just doesn't sound right. And I actually called the company and got a hold of their HR department. And they said, no, it is not a real job.
God.
The people are using it as a way to get people's credit card numbers because since you're working remotely, you need to buy computer equipment and they want you to buy the equipment through their vendor so that you're set up to be an employee. So, it's not, we'll reimburse you.
Oh.
And he ended up with 2 of those almost simultaneously. And we were like, wow, I've never heard of such a thing. But anyway, that's a
safety tip.
It's a safety tip. I was just shocked, absolutely shocked.
Because people applying for college job or in between.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
So that's a little bend away from your ghosting. We have been mostly ghosted by candidates where we do a phone interview or we've reached out and talked to them and we schedule them for that next interview or that meeting with the organization and they don't show up.
Really?
No response. Nothing.
They don't show up?
They don't show up.
Oh God, that's terrible.
I mean, it's just like,
what
took
happened? Someone's spot.
Yeah.
That's
and so
fair.
Part of you goes same as you. Everybody's really busy. Everybody's hiring. Maybe they got another job. Maybe they got sick. maybe they needed to have another application for their unemployment. I mean, you just start trying to go through the stories because you don't know why. You don't know what happened. But 9 times out of 10, when they ghost you, they really ghost you. You never hear from them again. You have no idea what happened. You hope that they're all right.
Is that every level job? Oh
Well,
yeah,
what's
sorry.
interesting
Yeah.
to me about that? I think to myself, their reputation is on the
Yeah.
line now when they do something like this,
Right.
and yet I'm never thinking.
Exactly.
And I'll say, in my days, what we were taught. So
In my days.
we send a letter out, right? We say we have this interview. We would get a letter back saying, "Sorry, we've moved on." I was taught to send another letter thanking them for the process.
Right.
So I've been
Right.
doing, I always thank them. If I didn't get it, thank you so much. Please keep me in your whatever. We don't know what to
Yep.
do. So the fact that some of our candidates are doing that, I'm just like, oh my gosh.
You're just like, you just don't even understand. You don't know what you've just done.
Can I ask about
But
the ghost?
but yeah,
Yeah, the ghosting. Do you see that more with senior level, executive level positions, or is this more entry level, that mid career?
it tends to be more entry level, mid career, and I think it's because the pool is larger.
Okay.
So you get a larger variety of candidates. You get
Okay.
more, just
Sure.
total volume, more candidates.
Yeah.
At the senior levels, we're seeing fewer applicants. So once in a while, we'll get a few that you've reached out to 3 times to schedule a phone interview and just haven't got a response, and
Mm,
so you just move on. It's just like
okay.
they must not be interested anymore. We'll
Hmm.
just move on.
Mm-hmm. Wow. That's
But my assumption
surprising.
also
Yeah.
then it goes into your database and they're flagged.
Right. Right.
So people out in the audience, remember that.
Yeah,
Right.
I mean, I would flag somebody who doesn't show up, and I'm trying to, pitch for them to be one of
Right.
our top candidates for this. I mean, because the time you spend, I've been through your process too. I mean, any recruiter process, if you're expecting not to be ghosted, then don't do it.
Right.
That's just a
Yeah.
common courtesy. Wow.
Yeah. And the process isn't short. It is a
Yeah.
long process.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hmm.
So go back to something you said about your son when LinkedIn, people are reaching out for jobs, opportunities to make some of it real, some of it isn't. What are your thoughts about LinkedIn? I was at a case conference a while back and we had one of the creators of LinkedIn come and talk to us.
Hmm.
And he brought up something that was very interesting to say with me. He goes, how many people have more than 500 connections? And it was right. And it was and when people reach out to you, like, I want to connect to you, you just hit yes, okay, fine. But you don't
Right.
really pay attention. Like, tell me why. So I've asked people, look, if you want to connect to me, tell me why. Give me a little bit more information. I do the same thing. I
Right.
try to do the same thing. Tell me about that in your world. How do you use LinkedIn to find people? And what is that percentage of that? How does that help
Right.
you?
LinkedIn is fascinating. One of the first things I learned when I joined the national network of search consultants was that the clients love LinkedIn. The clients want to see their job posted on LinkedIn. They want to know you're recruiting on LinkedIn because all the best people come through LinkedIn, and it's very rare that you get a candidate through LinkedIn.
Hmm.
That is pretty consistent with what I found. Now, we do use LinkedIn as a direct recruiting tool where we go in and we set up a job and we literally search for people who meet particular criteria. You live within 50 miles, you've had these 3 job descriptions, you're connected to these 4 people, and do this and see who pops up. And I've sent direct invitations to them to jobs and said, hey, we're looking around.
That's includes
Yeah.
Tom and I, right? Tom and
Yep.
I.
And those tend to be a little bit better because you've reached out and you've made a connection.
Okay.
But the other side of LinkedIn, here's the dark side of LinkedIn, and we all know that LinkedIn has a dark side. We see it all the time with women of color. We see it with trans discussions. We see it with HR issues. There's a whole dark world of LinkedIn. Another piece of the dark world is clients who look at their finalists and go, I'm going to go look them up on LinkedIn, or I'm going to go look them up on Facebook, and I'm going to find out who our mutual connections are. So, Tom, you have 500 connections. My client just looked up and said they know George. They reach out to George and say, George, tell me about Tom. What do you think about Tom? And George says, oh, Tom ghosted me. The last time we had a conversation, I reached out to him and he didn't say anything. I don't know if he's a really good person to be connected with. That person goes back to their organization. Oh, we can't hire Tom. I mean, he's LinkedIn. They say they don't like him. Was any of that fair? Was any of that accurate? Was any of that even appropriate for work to be done? And the answer is no on all of those. No, that was not appropriate to have happen. But the answer there is everybody has somebody on LinkedIn that doesn't know them or doesn't like them, because we have so many connections and we don't actually feed and care those connections. We just know that we're connected to a lot of people. If you really fed and cared for all of your connections, you'd probably have 100 or 200, and you'd be able to know who they were and what they were. And if they ever reached out and said, hey, what do you think about so and so, you'd be able to say, oh yeah, we really connected. These are the communications. I've really got a lot of respect. I've seen the work that you've done. We've met for coffee. You would really know. But the dark side of LinkedIn is anybody can say anything about anybody, because we're all trying to be connected without really being connected.
Wow.
I actually have taken that advice that I have received from Agnes and I have cleaned out so sorry if you're not connected to me, but I have actually cleaned out a lot of my LinkedIn connections because, I receive invitations from people around the world sometimes. And in the past, I'm like, sure. Okay. Yeah. Okay. I'll accept. And then at first I was like, wow, I have a lot of connections. But then I started looking, I'm like, they're not even people I know. I have no ability to understand at what point in my 25 plus year career I would have collaborated with this person. And the more that I started to look at my LinkedIn, it looked like I was almost endorsing them, which is not actually what I'm trying to do. And so then I almost felt like, wait, I can't endorse them and I can't imagine they would be able to endorse me. So let's kind of break ties. And so I've been unlinking unlinking my LinkedIn. But thank you for that advice. It is true. Somebody has somebody, as you said, that just may not like you, or for whatever reason. There's jealousy, or like, wait, why would you be talking to them? I'm the person interested in that position.
Right.
And so I've learned, I think it's healthy exercise if you have the time to actually go through and make sure that you can actually also be substantive in providing feedback on someone that is on your LinkedIn too. So thank you for that.
That is one. Yes,
Sure.
I just wrote myself a note. I'm going to start doing that. I'm going to
Unlinking.
go through. Yeah.
Unlinking.
Yes.
Yeah, the
Yes.
LinkedIn
And
people may not
sometimes,
like that, but
I feel bad. You get these, I'm looking at my page right now and all these things are sitting here open, like, I want to connect to you. I'm like, who are you? And then I let it sit there
Right.
because I feel bad and guilty. But you know what? You just helped me out.
Right.
I'm going to start going through this.
Come through and say no.
Yep.
Well, let's go into speaking of LinkedIn, just to transition out of that. Just curious, there was a recent article, maybe you both saw it, circulating on LinkedIn over the last few weeks, highlighting the relevance of cover letters. And,
Oh yeah.
A part of me is like, I haven't really had a chance. I haven't written a lot of cover letters, because sometimes recruiters, they just, and you don't write a cover letter. But are cover letters necessary? And do people actually read them?
I read every one of them.
You do?
We actually laugh. We laugh because we would be what you would call a boutique employment agency. We're small. We're really focused on what we do. Every application gets read 3 times before you get to a phone interview, because I'm looking through them, my recruiter is looking through them, and then we double check each other and say, is that really who we want to move forward to a phone interview? So, we're odd. We're odd in the world. And it's one of the things that we bring a value to. But we read them for exactly what Tom was asking about, which is what do you do with transferable skills? How do you figure out if somebody is trainable? How do you figure out if somebody has an interest that's beyond what's in their resume? There is no way in your resume to tell me that just because you've worked for animal organizations for 10 years that you really have this deep burning interest to work for a diabetes organization. And I'm not going to make that connection looking at your resume. I will when I read your cover letter and you tell me that you have taken some classes, that you've got this connection, that you have learned through some health issues, that you really are interested in this diabetes, and you believe your skills are transferable, because all of a sudden that changes the entire conversation. So I think there is value to a cover letter. I get what people say, which is, how many hoops are we making a candidate jump through in order to get to an interview? And I think that's a different conversation than a resume or a cover letter.
Okay. Thanks for that. I mean,
Yeah.
Go ahead,
I was
Tom.
just going to say, I agree with that. I know as I'm interviewing people, pass. reading that letter connected me to them. I could learn more about them and I
Mhm.
would circle things and then bring those things up. The resume gave me some information, but that cover letter really explained why they wanted the job, why they want the transition. So I agree with you on regarding the cover letter. The challenge I've always had is that people that write well will, I mean, you pick up, right?
Do
And
well.
so I usually recommend the people go to a professional writer if you have to do that, because if your cover letter, that may be the one moment that gets you in the door.
Right.
So do it. Yeah.
Right. We also and that's a whole nother conversation we can have at some point in time about bias in the interview process and what do you do
Mm.
about bias, because we know everybody has it, everybody expresses it. So how do you respond when somebody has a misspelling in their cover letter? How do you respond when somebody who is obviously applying for multiple
Yeah.
jobs put somebody else's organization name in instead of your organization name? What does that tell you about them? And
Yes.
we've done a lot of work with organizations saying it tells you nothing except that they really are trying hard and they really are looking for a job, and that they're putting in a lot of time and effort into this while they're also working at another job. It doesn't tell you anything else beside that. Did the story tell you something? Did the information
Yeah.
tell you something? Was there
Yeah.
something in here that told you about this candidate? That's great. But
Okay.
when you start putting your assumptions about how they did the cover letter in, then we run into a bias issue.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, yes. Your assumptions are creating a story around
Right.
someone you
Mhm.
don't even know. And it's interesting you bring this up because during the last several years, I started picking up on certain things. I truly believe if anyone wants to be part of an interviewing session, they have to go through training. They have got to go through training because I've seen some questions that have come up now through interviews and I'm
Yes.
just blown away. I am shocked that this person is sitting at this table asking these types of questions. Shocked. And I
Yeah.
know at that point
Hmm.
something is missing. Something
Yep.
is missing.
Yep.
I actually, this is way back in the 90s. I was part of an interview session, but I have to
The
share with you.
90s were a great decade.
Well, but even then, we knew certain things we should not be saying. I was at this organization. It was four of us in this meeting. We're interviewing this person. The person on the right to me asked the question, "Do you plan on getting pregnant anytime soon?"
I have actually
Oh
had
my
that
lord.
question, probably in your
Oh my
room.
gosh.
I've had that question actually into the 2000s.
Well,
So I
when that
have had
question
that.
was asked, I'll tell you, the audience can't see me, but I slowly just turned my head to the person at the right, and I slowly turned back because I didn't want the person to react. Person never even thought about it. The interview went well. She left. The supervisor said, "We just hired that person." And the one person sitting next to me goes, "Well, why?" He goes, "You asked the inappropriate question. That was wrong, blah, blah, blah." He goes, "Well, that's unfair. No one really, blah, blah, blah." And I looked at the person to the right man, and I looked at the manager, I'm like, he's right. He never went through
Mhm.
any training. What makes you think that I mean, yes, you would think he should have known this, but why? There was no
Right.
training.
Yeah. Do you train your clients in the interview process? And I've been through situations where the recruiter's asking
Hmm.
all the questions. So what is the best model
We
there?
don't quote unquote train. We don't run them through a training session. And we've kind of gone round and round about that, about how do we want to train? What is it we're training them to do? We do have conversations with all of our clients about what questions they're asking. Why are they asking those questions? What does a good answer look like? How are you going to know that you received a good answer? We always have a conversation before an interview starts about bias and what do you do about it and when does it start in an interview, which is as soon as the person logs in. So how do you adjust for that? How do you make a point of that? But we really haven't trained them to say, when somebody says they're talking about their development experience and you want to know if you should rank them on a scale of 1 to 4, this is what you're listening for. I mean, we try to get that inherently in the conversation about why we're asking the questions. What does a good answer look like? But there's always somebody with a rogue question because we often allow them to do follow-up questions. I think my favorite right now, the rogue question is, so how long do you plan to stay with us? And I'm like, what? They're
I
going to
hate
say
that
two
one.
weeks? I mean, what do you think the answer is going to be? They don't know how long they're going to stay with you.
10
How well
years.
are you
Yeah.
going to treat them? What's their boss going to be like? When does the supervisor leave? I mean, come on.
Yeah. I mean, I think that question, I mean, would you say there are certain questions that you've had to kind of prepare people like those are dated, they're irrelevant, because I think the pandemic has revealed, and maybe we can quickly transition to this. Do you see that it's a candidates market
Yeah, it's a candidates market.
as a result of that?
It's
It's
a
a
candidates
candidates
market. It's a
market. And
hybrid
then
market.
what does
A
that
hybrid
mean?
that
Hybrid
you do
market.
not
Yeah.
have to be in the office 5 days a week from 8 to 5.
Okay.
In fact,
Okay. And does that,
maybe you don't have to be in
yeah.
the office at all.
Okay. We often hear candidates that are interviewing for organizations, but usually you're told now this is a time for you to also interview the
Yeah,
organization. And I've been in situations where I get 5 minutes at the end to ask my
right.
questions. And that's not enough time. And I've been in interviews, even in executive positions, where it's like
Yeah.
25 minutes. So explain to us what's the benefit of those small 25-minute interviews with 5 minutes left to ask a question, and when is it appropriate for a candidate to say, gee, you are liking me, you're asking me for another interview, can I carve out some time to get to know you more? Is it appropriate, and when is that?
That's a really, really good question. And it's something I think about a lot. And so I've got like 3 answers for you. The first one is we learned from one of our clients who was doing some equity work about flipping the interview so that you start with the candidate questions instead of starting with the interview questions. And the idea being that this is an opportunity for the candidate to gain some information prior to walking into the interview. There's also an assumption there that we make that 9 times out of 10, that is mostly beneficial when the candidate has the questions ahead of time. So then they could ask a specific question to help them with their later answers, or they could find out something, or they could say, you seem to have formulated a lot of questions around this. What's going on in your organization about that? So flipping the agenda for the interview, providing the questions ahead of time, making sure that the candidate knows that they have this opportunity. The other part of that question is when we do our phone interviews, we usually schedule 45 minutes to an hour. We assume that the actual phone interview is only 30 to 40 minutes so that there's another 20 minutes for the candidate to ask us any question that they want to ask and really talk about as transparently as we can about what's this organization up to. I mean, I have had some really intense candidate conversations where they're saying, I looked at their board and their board members have been there for 20 years and you're telling me they want to do this change strategy and they want this and they want that. And I'm telling you it's not going to happen. Why are we having this conversation? Is this organization even on the right page? And that's a great conversation they can have with me because I'm safe. I am a safe person to be having that conversation with. I'm going to be as open as I can be. Obviously, I want to represent the client well, but to do that, I have to have a really good candidate. So it doesn't do me any good to tell a candidate what they want to hear if they're going to be a bad choice later. So we have a phone interview time, we have that in-person time or the video time. Then I would say for any candidate that is hired, when you're ready into that spot where you're in the final 2 or 3, you should feel comfortable saying, I need to meet with. So if you're the executive director and you haven't met with the treasurer and the finance director before you sign the letter, it's probably not a good sign. You should probably say, I need to talk to finance before we make any decisions here. If you're a chief development officer and you have a staff of 5 and you say, I have not met any of my direct reports, probably you don't want to sign the offer letter until you've had an opportunity to at least connect or meet with them. The fourth part of this is interviews are really, really long. And so how does the organization balance how many questions they're asking you with how do you balance how many questions you're asking the organization before they've lost you as a candidate? Because the market is so competitive right now that if they take too long in the process, you're probably already gone as a candidate and have accepted another position. So trying to figure out this
Mm-hmm.
balance of how many hours of conversation does it take to see if you're a good fit is still a bit of a challenge.
Mm-hmm. I definitely want to ask a question about mental health, but before we go there, along those same lines, when you meet a candidate, how does that person stand out to you? What goes ping? This is the right person. Obviously, there are going to be some skill alignment,
Mm-hmm.
but what else are you looking for? What else do you see?
I'm looking for how well can they tell me why they're in this line of work. Why do they do what they do? How does this translate to this particular position? What have they learned about themselves that tells me that if they got put into this position, they could manage up or manage down or manage sideways? How do they talk about work? Is their job the only thing they care about, or is this work something they're interested in, but they could see themselves at a couple of places? So that's a funky one. Nonprofits want to hear that they are the only reason you exist in the world. I don't want candidates whose number one passion is this organization, because once they see how the organization functions when you get behind the golden curtain, it all goes up into smoke. And so I want somebody who knows that they care about the mission, that they care about the organization, but they understand that it's a job, and that they understand that there's a separation here. The nonprofit is not going to fill their entire life and is not going to keep their fountain full. It's like just not going to happen. So I'm really trying to learn from this person what makes them happy. How do they do their job? What are they excited about? What are the kind of the work environments they thrive in? What kind of supervision do they like? How do they like to supervise? I mean, I'm really trying to figure out who this person is. The other thing I often do, because we usually have, somewhere in the process of 10 or 12 jobs going at any one time, whether they're advertised or not advertised, I start tossing out ideas. Well, we have this position at, I'm going to be working with, and what do you think about this? And try to get some sense from the person about what is making them excited. What is it that they see, or I met some development directors years and years ago that were like, I don't do diseases. It's like, okay, well, that's really good to know. Thank you for sharing that. So if I tossed out the Diabetes Association, you would say, no, that's not really mine. And be like, okay, let's hone in. And something we haven't talked about is how candidates find their jobs. I encourage candidates to go out to all of the job
Yeah.
boards and open up random jobs and pull out pieces of jobs that they read that they want to do or they think
Wow,
they're good at, and
that's
build
smart.
them a job description and then send it back to me. And that's a way that I can see what they think they bring, what they value, where they want to stretch and grow, and I can
Oh,
kind of
that's a
look
great
at it and go,
idea.
oh, so you're looking for this kind of a position.
I love that. I mean, before you jump into your question, I just wanted to piggyback on just the interviewing process. So let's say you have a candidate who you're like, this person has a stellar reputation, a stellar track record, their resume speaks. I mean, we're human. People, especially experienced people, sometimes are probably the best. You've seen
Hmm.
them on stage, but then they do the interview and they get overwhelmed because there's maybe 10 people, and they're so overwhelmed because, let's face it, virtual communication is not the same. I do better in person. I know that personally. So what do you say when you're like, let's say your favorite, your top candidate doesn't perform as well, and they're like, wow,
Yeah,
what do
that's
you
a really
do?
tough one. Um, you know, in actuality, I can tell you more times than not, I have been disappointed by a candidate's performance more than the organization has. Where I know what the person is capable of, I've had these conversations, I can see it, and I'm just like, that was a little flat. That just didn't really work. And the organization has said, wow, I learned this. I saw this. I learned that. And I'm like, huh. Well, obviously we weren't in the same interview. So a lot of that is for me to not make the assumption that it was a bad interview. That's
Okay.
the first thing. And then listening and absorbing what they're saying, what they learned, what they heard, and then being able to redirect that a little bit based on, at the end of that conversation when we do a debrief, about what is it that they wanted to hear? What didn't they hear? Where was that at? And then see if there's any opening to bring a candidate back to fill in some of those
Hmm,
spots.
very cool. Let's switch over to mental health a little bit.
Oh, right.
And as I think about the work you do, as you're meeting with companies, as you're meeting with clients, you're going to begin to pick up on some things with the
Hmm.
organization, even with the clients. You mentioned something earlier about asking questions about what does this person do in their personal lives? How do they balance these things out? What are your thoughts when we talk about mental health and what's going on right now? People are talking about it a lot more, and
Hmm.
so forth. I know I've been in touch with a number of different people, and I pushed them to start thinking about their mental health, taking time out to be with their family or community members or just be by themselves. Yet these people don't want to do it.
Right.
And so I've wondered about people that are taking on jobs now. They're in fear of, like, I have to prove myself right away. So
Right.
tell me about that. Tell me about your thoughts on mental health, especially when people are being matched to organizations that may not fit the right mold.
Yeah, I think mental health is just so overwhelmingly huge. And it just changes every single day. The day that you feel good, the day you feel bad. I was talking to somebody in a corporate setting this morning, and they said, "You just caught me at a bad day. You got the real me. I'm
Mm.
exhausted. I'm tired. I can't do it." And it's like, that's all right. It's all right. Take a moment. Um, I find that when we push people to come back into the office and perform in a particular way in the pre-pandemic methodology, that we cause more mental harm than we do when we think, how is it that we wanted to care for people and be with people during the pandemic? And how does that translate to my management style now? And if you're with an organization that had hybrid systems, who had extra pay for high stress positions, who instituted different PTO policies, who rearranged those things during the pandemic, and now they're saying, well, yeah, but we don't need it anymore. Those are the organizations I worry with about being able to hire folks, being able to retain folks. There's this huge thing about retention bonuses instead of exit or, sign on bonuses. There's things that people are quickly trying to move past from the pandemic that were actually good, and
Okay.
it's a matter of trying to remind people that your organization was successful for the last 2 years. Why would you not think that's going to continue? Your people did have opportunities to be themselves, to do what they needed to do, to be present for their kids, to do all of that work, and you still were successful as an organization. Why do you think that's going to change? And I think it's too easy to default back to what it was, because we so want normal that we default back too far, and we forget that
Yeah.
normal doesn't exist. That's history now. That's the way it used to be. That is history, and we don't always have to repeat history to learn from it again. We can do things differently moving forward,
Mm.
but it's hard. I know how hard it is for me to eat healthy for 2 days in a row. I mean, why would I remember all of these important things that I learned during the pandemic when I'm tired and stressed and worried? But those are the things we're trying to remind people of, that it worked. That caring for people wasn't a bad outcome from this last 2 years.
Yeah.
Mm.
Well, I mean, thank you for that. As we're wrapping up here, I think we definitely want to bring you back. There's a topic that Tom and I would like to dive in more with you, and maybe bring another recruiter also to talk about this, is the idea of what contributes to mental health is toxic work cultures, especially in the nonprofit space. I mean, some of what I can tell you, the development field in particular, some of the large development shops and major organizations, you have 7, 8, 10 highly accomplished development officers that are competing with each other, getting their
Yes.
fundraising credit. That's a toxic environment. It's actually
Hmm.
creates a competitive nature that does we're all in the same goal, and the shared goal model doesn't really work.
Right.
And I would love to spend more time bringing Agnes back, and a couple others to really talk about that, because I think naturally development, and you said you kind of started with WVDO being focused, how do you that's something that when I first joined in the 90s, it was like competitive, competitive, competitive. And it's like my goal as a young person in the
Hmm.
field was, I want to get an 8-figure gift. The organizations never had an 8-figure gift. And what did I do?
Mm.
I got that 8-figure gift, and I was only 27 years old. I was
And then they
exhausted.
went, where's the next one?
Yeah. And then I was exhausted. I got
Yeah,
like, I
you
was
did
in,
it once, you can do it five
yeah, I was
times.
in like I think I was in the 30 under 30, and then I've been under the 40 under 40. Now I want to be under the 50 under 50, or the 60, now, or so 50 over whatever, as we get over there. But it's exhausting. But
It
I
is.
can tell you, I didn't trust anybody. And what I learn now, I had probably suppressed a lot of self doubt, lack of trust,
Hmm.
that kind of feeds into your mental health and well being. And I know I'm not the only development officer who has spanned that experience. Would love to spend more time on that. But Tom, do you want to
Hmm.
get towards our last couple questions, and we can do at last in our favorite one?
Yes, definitely. Definitely, I want to ask about some ending tips. What are some of the tips you would give to our audience?
Tips for people applying for jobs. think about what you want to be doing in a 1 to 3 year goal setting adventure. Don't think about where you want to be in 5 years. The world is changing so rapidly, it's too far away. You need to be relevant to what you're doing now, what your skills are now, and what you want to be doing now. Don't be afraid to reach out multiple times. In this world of lots and lots of candidates, we're trying our best, but it doesn't mean that we don't like you. Reach out a couple of times, get that response, and make sure that you're checking back in. It's okay. It's okay to check back in. For nonprofits, we really need to have a conversation about your hiring practices and your management practices and what do you plan to do in the next 1 to 3 years. There's a lot that's happening and changing in the marketplace, and having boards that have not changed in 10 plus years, having founding executive directors, having real serious demands on your time have probably made you flat footed in this market. And that's not going to carry forward.
That's
Excellent.
excellent.
Love it.
Oh my God. We're definitely bringing you back. But
This is fun. I'll come play with you
okay,
guys anytime.
I love this. I think when we have, we span, I think, different sectors and parts of the country as well, so definitely I've learned a lot, so much from you today, Agnes, and I know our audience has. And we want to walk into a little part of why, because we've been in your shoes.
Yes.
That's the name of our podcast. And Tom and I have talked about this, and we like to, ask you what shoe you're wearing. Maybe
Yes.
you're barefoot. But we know that sometimes shoes can also give you a sense of your environment and what you're feeling that day. So, for example, I'm wearing just a pair of more summery, springy ballet flats because it's not raining today. Which I'm like, oh, and it is technically spring. So I'm excited to just walk without having to put on rain boots. So what are you wearing, Agnes, and why?
I am wearing slip-on slippers because I work from home, and because that's how I manage my thermostat. And so I can take my slippers off and get my temperature back down again, and then I can put my slippers back on and I can raise my temperature back up. So it's my thermometer.
Love it. Love it.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah.
I
Nez
like
and I
that.
had a conversation about how the shoes also reflect your frame of mind that
Yeah.
day.
Mm-hmm.
It could reflect maybe what you're looking to do in the future or something of that nature. And so I love what you just said. Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
I can tell you that I did buy a new pair of sandals because we're going to a conference. Been canceled for 2 years. We're actually physically going to a conference in a warm space. So I have like two pairs of shoes
yay.
lined up going, I haven't worn these shoes in over 2 years. And I have a new pair of sandals. And by golly, we're going to wear them whether they feel good or not.
That's right. Now we can start traveling and going to conferences. And
Right?
although I am signing up for a lot of virtual ones, just because they're there and it's, some of them are free.
Yeah.
But Tom, do you want to close this out?
Yeah. Agnes, thank you so much for the information you shared with us and the tips and so forth. It's so wonderful. I mean, I started taking down tons of notes, and the first thing that came to my mind is go back through my LinkedIn and begin to delink.
Unlink.
Yep. Unlink.
When you talked about even, let me ask you too, the work you were doing, you talked about training education, how you're teaching people to write case statements, how ask for money, write grants. Can you talk a little bit about that really quickly? I want to end it that way. Tips on education, how people can educate themselves to get into the field. Can you talk a little bit about that again?
Well, I think the really quick and easy way is reach out to Willamette Valley Development Officers, wvdo-or.org. The majority of their programming now is virtual, so you can be anywhere in the world. But those programs were specifically constructed to take somebody who is interested in the development world, teach them the science of how do you do the work of development, and then add in the piece of the art of how do we get along with people, how do we build relationships, what does stewardship look like. But those programs are specifically geared to getting people into the sector and into their work. And then adding in a leadership academy for people who want to be EDs, a grants management if you want to be a grant writer. I think they're adding one soon around events. There's ways that you can break it off, but getting that foundation of why do we have a database? How does it function? Where does that go? What do we do with a case statement? How do we ask somebody for money? We were the first organization, we based it off some things happening up at the University of Washington, that recorded people making asks and then gave them feedback on those asks as part of a class assignment.
That's
So it's
excellent.
getting getting those access points virtually. So I would say WVDO, go for it.
That's excellent.
Awesome. And then last but not least, your company, your organization, what do you do? What are you looking for in clients?
You betcha. Nonprofit professionals now? Is that my
Yes.
name? Nonprofit professionals.
Now.
Jeez. We specifically work with nonprofits. We work with a variety of kind of nonprofits, C3, C4, C6. Everybody's a nonprofit in that realm, 501c. We are specifically looking for clients who want executive directors, development directors, operating directors on that administrative side. We work with organizations with budgets under $1 million. We work with organizations with budgets over $10 and $15 million. We try really, really hard to care for our client and make sure that they feel like they're a part of the process and that they are engaged and understand what it is that we're hiring for them and with them.
Thank you.
Great. And how can they reach you?
Agnes at npprofessionals.com, 503-750-8585.
Perfect. We'll
Awesome.
make sure to also include that link. And
That's right.
to our audience, thank you for listening. We look forward to sharing more on our next episode of Because We've Been in Your Shoes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of Because We've Been in Your Shoes.
Join us next time as we share, advocate, and highlight experiences and ideals from nonprofit colleagues, leaders, and champions.
Subscribe to Because We've Been in Your Shoes podcast and be the first to hear our new episodes introducing new topics and guest speakers. Remember, nonprofit friends, you're not alone because we've been in your shoes.